I noticed that learning to think is something that most countries try to suppress. Not just people, but you see, we have such a huge and complex brain that no other living being has been able to utilize our thought processes for what we do. And I think that is beautiful. We live in places like if you live in the US or you live in China, their tactic of having you not think is by essentially making you so uneducated that the only thing you're thinking about is what's in front of you. Now, IQ is a highly contested thing. Personally, I don't believe that it is a revelation of one's character, but I do believe there is some truth to it. Like with astrology, I mean, so many people believe in astrology, but you keep the information vague enough, it's bound to stick to somebody. And IQ is kind of the same. Um, you notice with Americans that have IQs less than 100 is that they can read, they can write, but they don't think. And that's an issue. See, of course, we have labels for everything like rage bait or joy bait or clickbait or any of those baits. But in reality, you look at things like social media and you look at people spending 4 hours of their life on social media. That's because a lot of people just don't want to think. Um, I don't have the source, and I'm not even sure if this is the source, but I know there was a study done in some British university where they essentially kept people for 15 minutes in a room and they were strapped to this electrical device that would either give them, I think, no shock or like a light shock or a very, very painful one with nothing else. And studies showed that the vast majority of people really liked shocking themselves because they would rather do anything but think. Now, thinking is something that you have to learn. It's not intuitive at all. The way you learn to think like a mathematician is not going to be the same way that you learn to think as a soldier. You need to think in the subjects that you want to think about. That sounds like yapping, which it kind of is. But if you want to learn more about literature, you have to start thinking like an author. If you want to learn how to make money, don't think like an entrepreneur because, well, look at the vast majority of them. You want to think like a successful businessman. You want to think of the people who did right, but also have the humility to teach yourself the wrongs and learn from them. There is no such thing as failure. There's only such things as learning experiences. People think of failure as this terrible thing that they don't want to think about and that, in fact, they want to avoid. And I don't think failure is a bad thing at all. Failure is the main thing that we learn from. When you were a kid and you were learning to walk as a baby, and you fell on your butt, did you say, "Oh, this walking thing ain't for me"? No, you got back up and you kept on learning how to walk. Sure, you may have cried here and there because maybe your fall hurt, but it's the same thing with relationships. These dudes that are like, "Oh, I'll never find a girl" or whatever. Not only is their mindset essentially making it impossible for them by themselves, but it's also that people don't think about skills as ways of thinking, but they are skills that you have to think about. And with dating, you have to think about, well, what's the best way for me to cold approach a man or a woman or a person? What's the best way for me to get that first date? What's the best way for me to get that second date? Um, what's the best way for me to have the most success in what I want? Many people date for other reasons, but for me, it's to find a lifelong partner. So I had to teach myself through many, many years of failure, not success, failure, to then get those winning dates, to get those dates where I found girlfriends that I actually enjoyed being with, but I also found girlfriends that I hated being with. No disrespect to them. There's two sides to every story, and frankly, in the beginning, I definitely wasn't a great boyfriend. Nothing crazy, but it's just you don't learn how to love somebody until they communicate to you. But it also works the other way around. Communication is also one of those things you have to think about because, well, if you were never taught these things, how are you supposed to think about it? That's essentially my whole premise of thinking. It's this ability that we have that is a learning tool that will allow us to be better than we were before. Of course, no one's a great, pet owner if you've never owned a lizard before, for example. You don't know the correct procedure on how much light to give the lizard, how much water. Some lizards you can't even give water. You have to give them lettuce because if you give them anything more than lettuce, they will drown. Um, with relationships, if you don't know how to communicate to your partner, both people are going to be frustrated because their needs aren't being met. That's what I mean by thinking. You don't think about these things until you go out and do them. And there is no set way of doing it correctly. There is no, formula for the most success. No, thinking is one of those things that you have to let your body push you to go to, and then you use your mind to figure out the best path. That's what I meant by all these things. Thinking isn't hard, but it is hard to master. It's one of those things like walking. People just think, oh, yeah, I've been walking all my life. Why do I have to worry about it? Well, you might have to worry about it if you start getting shin splints, or if your knees hurt after you run, or if your heels have terrible nerve damage because you've been overstepping. You don't think about these things. And with thinking, you should be thinking about everything, not overthinking. Because what overthinking is thinking of a thought that then leads to another thought, that then leads to another thought. Your thinking should be reserved for the real world. If you think I want to be a millionaire and you're over here, no education, working a minimum wage job that's barely paying the bills with piles upon piles of debt, you have to think about how to do it. Now, how do you start? You start by thinking, how can I? You do not say, no, I cannot. You say, how can I? In universities, what I really like now is that they're teaching you about fixed mindset and growth mindset. Essentially, fixed mindset are the people that believe that intelligence and thinking is a finite thing. That, I mean, people say that it's not wrong, but I personally think it's wrong because anybody can learn anything at any time. And growth mindset is a belief that you can. And that belief is what differentiates people from the ones who say, oh, I couldn't do it, so I quit or I dropped out, versus the ones that say, well, it was tough, I struggled, but I got through it. And that is what thinking is. Thinking is that ability that allows us to push past the thought of, I cannot. The second you start thinking, how can I? Those barriers that you created in your head disappear. The only barrier that you will come across is other people. However, as long as you keep thinking that you will get through it, about how you can get through it, and learn from those failures, the only thing you can have is success. That is the Monday Yappers. Thank you very much for listening. And remember, think, but don't just think about thoughts. Think, how can I? And watch as your world changes when you apply it. Thank you very much. Editing Eddie here. Thank you so much if you made it this far, genuinely. I appreciate it. Any comments, questions, concerns, put it in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time.